Good afternoon. This is your Tropical Atlantic Marine Weather Briefing for Sunday, January 19th. It's valid for the next 5 days through Friday, January 24th. I'm Jeff Lewitsky, a lead forecaster at the Tropical Analysis and Forecast Branch. Here's a look at the summary for the next 5 days. We have a gale warning currently in effect in the Gulf of Mexico through this evening, and then gale conditions possible again across much of the Gulf of Mexico Tuesday into early Wednesday. We'll also have some northerly swell of 12 to at least 17 feet in the northeast high seas waters through Tuesday. Here's a look at the surface analysis from this Sunday morning. There's a cold front stretching from the northeast Gulf back towards the southwest Gulf. We did have some gale conditions late morning into early afternoon in the west central Gulf off of Mexico, and still some expected into this evening in the southwest Gulf off of Veracruz, otherwise fresh to strong winds behind the front and some seas of 8 feet or greater west of the front in portions of the northwest and north central Gulf of Mexico. The Caribbean's pretty quiet under a weak pressure gradient. There is a weak front in the southwest North Atlantic ahead of the incoming front, and an old frontal boundary beginning to stall out in portions of the central and eastern Atlantic. Let's take a look at the forecast for winds and waves. This is for this evening. That cold front manages to progress to the east, stretching from off of the Carolinas to the Yucatan Peninsula by this point, and gale conditions could still be occurring in the southwest Gulf off of Veracruz early this evening with fresh to strong winds elsewhere in the Gulf behind it, and some seas of 8 to around 12, 13 feet across portions of the Gulf of Mexico behind it. The Caribbean, we could have some fresh to strong winds offshore northern Colombia with some seas of around 8 to 10 feet. In the Atlantic, we do have fresh to strong winds on both sides of the front there, east of northern Florida, and some seas of 10 feet or greater. And then in the far northeast portion of the high seas waters, we do have some seas of 12 feet or greater, possibly up to around 17 feet there, and mainly moderate to fresh trades across the open waters, locally strong just east of the Caribbean islands, seas of mainly 8 to 10 feet. Moving ahead to Monday morning for winds and waves, there's a little reinforcing front sneaking in off the Carolinas into the Atlantic, but otherwise the front in general has weakened, with winds now mainly moderate to fresh in the Gulf of Mexico, locally strong from the Straits of Florida to near the Yucatan Channel, and we're watching already Monday morning off the coast of Texas in the northwest Gulf a developing gale. Winds in the Atlantic associated with the front have also diminished, with winds of 20 knots or less south of 31 north. Persistent trades of fresh to strong from the eastern to central Caribbean will help to support some seas of 8 to 10 feet there, and we still have the northerly swell of 12 to around 17 feet in the northeast high seas waters, with the continuing fresh to locally strong trades and 8 to 10 foot seas elsewhere in the open Atlantic waters. Tuesday morning, we have another front and possibly low developing in portions of the western Gulf. By then, Tuesday morning could already have gale force winds again off the Texas coast to south of Louisiana. And that old frontal boundary now is stalled out from portions of the central Atlantic just east of Bermuda down towards southern Florida and the Yucatan Channel. Have a large area of fresh to strong trades from the central Atlantic through the eastern to central Caribbean due to high pressure east of the old boundary there, and still have by Tuesday morning some seas of 12 feet or greater in the northeast high seas waters. Now for Wednesday morning, that new front and associated low has continued to the east with the low in the Atlantic north of the area. However, the associated cold front, this next cold front, now stretching from just west of Bermuda back towards south of southern Florida and the Yucatan again, with high pressure building in behind it, large area fresh to strong winds in the Gulf of Mexico behind it, and possible gales again off of Veracruz. Also some very large seas possible of 12 to around 17, 18 feet across much of the Gulf of Mexico, and also behind the front just off of southeast Georgia and northern Florida, and the continuing area of fresh to locally strong trades from the central Atlantic to the central Caribbean, with some seas to around 12 feet, portions of the central Atlantic and off of northern Colombia. Now getting into the end of the week, the cold front is weakening extending somewhere from east of Bermuda into the southwest North Atlantic central portion of the waters, and then stalling out and weakening further as it continues towards the Yucatan Channel Straits of Florida. Winds behind it, thankfully, by Thursday morning have diminished, really looking at moderate or weaker across much of the waters behind the front, maybe locally fresh in portions of the Atlantic, and the associated seas are coming down, however, still some remnant 8 to 10 foot seas northeast of the Bahamas, and the continuing large area of fresh to locally strong trades from the central Atlantic to central Caribbean, with seas locally to 12 feet across portions there. And lastly, for Friday morning, 120-hour forecast, we could have a little reinforcement of a weak front here extending from off the Carolinas into the Northwest Caribbean with high pressure behind it, tightening the gradient. And that could look to increase the winds to fresh to locally strong across much of the Gulf and off of northern Florida. And the same old here from the central Atlantic to central Caribbean with some fresh to locally strong trades and seas locally to around 12 feet across portions there. So in summary, we have a series of cold fronts that'll move through the Gulf and Atlantic waters. A gale warning in the Gulf of Mexico is in effect for this evening, with a brief break before gale conditions will be possible across much of the Gulf behind the next front and associated low pressure area Tuesday into early Wednesday, and also some northerly swell of 12 to around 17 feet in the northeast high seas waters, the open central Atlantic waters through at least Tuesday into early Wednesday. This has been your Tropical Atlantic Marine Weather Briefing. The next briefing will be issued by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 23rd. Remember, you can always get the latest marine forecast at hurricanes.gov/marine.